what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna introduce the Royal Foundation report that I'm sure most of you are familiar with, which came out really recently. And so just going through the main findings, talk a little bit about some research so that we can have a discussion about it. So what's the background? That the Royal Foundation did this very comprehensive study of attitudes to the early years, which came out recently with the video by the Duchess Kate. And it was, I thought, presented really well. It was also pitched really well in the sense that I guess we have all understood that this was the largest public study ever conducted on the early years. And they did like a very comprehensive study across a lot of different methods. So it was essentially a mixed method study. So there were different pieces. So there was initially a representative survey conducted by Ipsos Mori before actually the pandemic, where there were almost 4,000 respondents across the UK. Then there was this open online questionnaire that I believe I also answered to, the big 5 questions, which had more than 500,000 responses, of which just above 435,000 from the UK, which they got it from the IP address. Of course, this one, while the first one is nationally representative, the second one is not, it's just whoever who answered. And they also had some qualitative interviews with 40 parents who answered the face-to-face survey, and then also some qualitative ethnographic research with 12 families and 4 community interviews. And then once COVID hit, they also had a further survey on COVID to approximately 100,000 parents of 0 to 5-year-olds. So it was really quite a good comprehensive piece of work. And so if you go through the report, and especially at the very beginning, there seem to be a couple of points which are particularly emphasized. The first one is about what parents or respondents say about the importance of the childhood period as compared to other periods in the life of child. And the second one is about the importance of parental mental health and well-being. And so the fact that you have to start from supporting the parent if you want to support the child. So in terms of the structure, there are essentially 4 main themes. One is about the importance of the early years. Another one is about what means being a parent, then about parent support networks and the role of wider society. And so now I'm just going to touch the main results from 3 of these 4. So about the first one, so the key question which was asked, and at the bottom you see the responses for the very big 400,000 respondents from the online big 5, one of the big 5 questions, and at the top there are the responses from the face-to-face survey. This you see there are approximately 1,000. So the participants were asked about what do you think it influences how children develop from the start of pregnancy to age 5, and the possible answers were essentially genes, environment, and both of them. Now, of course, what we know today is that probably the combination of both of them which matters, and you see that by and large, this was the majority of responses. So in the survey, this was 72% of the responses, and in the big 5, it's reported 98% of the participants. It's believed that the experiences of a child in the early years, say, nurture, influence how a child develops. Then the question, which was essentially one of the 2 key points that I showed before, and it's the one which has probably surprised many people, and it's also reported by Kate in her video, is the one about which period of a child, a young person's life is the most important for health and happiness in adulthood. And you see that the 2 answers above from the online survey of 1,000 parents, and below the big 5 questions from the more than 100,000 online respondents. And what many people found really surprising is that essentially 31% in the survey and 24% in the big online sample say it's essentially the early, what we call the early years period. So start of pregnancy to 5 years. And then you see that there are 19% of respondents who said between 5 and 11, 10% 11, 16, 1% 16 and 18, 1% 18, 24. And then it's like approximately a third of them who responded they're all equally important. And so we can discuss this a little bit more in a few slides. And then there was another question which I thought was also quite informative when talking about this. So it was asked, at what age do you think a child's brain and mind is developing fastest? And this was only asked to the face-to-face survey. And as you can see here, approximately 2 out of 3 people say start of pregnancy to 2 years. So there is a sense that, you know, at least the respondents are aware that the early period is the one at which the brain and mind develops faster. So moving on with other results, some from the section on the reality of being a parent. So here the respondents were asked, to what extent do you agree or disagree that a happy parent equals a happy child? And then here you will see that both in the face-to-face survey and in the Big 5 question online survey, the vast majority essentially agreed with the fact that having a happy parent equals a happy child, so focusing on the importance of parental mental health and well-being. And in particular, in the survey, which was explicitly about the COVID, we see that 2 in 5 parents think that the pandemic will have negative impact on their long-term mental health. And women, and of course those who had financial difficulties, are particularly likely to report a negative impact, which is probably not surprising. Then let's move on another set of results from the role of wider society. And I thought this was quite interesting about essentially, you know, who is responsible for raising children. And here we see that 58% of those in the face-to-face survey, 53% of those in the Big 5 question online. 58% say it's mostly responsibility of parents to give children aged 0-5 the best chance of health and happiness. And then 18% say parents and society are equally responsible for giving children aged 0-5 the best chance, and 20% say it's a joint responsibility of everyone in society. If you go to the big question inside, there is a slight difference in responses here, because half of those providing the response say it's a shared responsibility between parents and others, but still a sizable proportion, 46%, say it's the primary responsibility of parents. And then the respondents were asked, okay, then, you know, apart from parents, who else is responsible for ensuring the children 0-5 had the best chance of health and happiness? And here you see the vast majority says wider family, but then there are no negligible percentages mentioning schools, nurseries, friends, health professionals, and then others, including a 5% local authorities. So there is a wide range of opinions. And this one, I thought it would be particularly interesting to know how certain characteristics correlate with these responses. So let's go back for a moment to this one, which, as I understand, was the one which surprised many people, about which period of a child and young person life is the most important. And just to remind you, here 31% said start of pregnancy to 5 years, 35% said all equally important, and in the big online survey, the Big 5 question with more than 400,000 respondents, also only 24% say it's only the early years, and most participants perceive all period to be important. And there are 2 points that I would like to discuss. So first one is that, is it really wrong to think that if your parents say they're all equally important, they don't recognize the importance of the early years? So maybe not. And in order to think about this, it's useful to think about, well, what was in the respondent mind when they were answering this question. So this question asks, which period is the most important? But by saying they're all equally important, they probably don't discard the importance of the early years. And in order to think about this, it's useful to introduce a concept in economics which is called dynamic complementarity. So essentially, we talk about dynamic complementarity when we have a complementarity between investment, so say how much time parents spend with the child in a period of the life cycle of the child, T+1, and investment in period S, where S is one for more period than T+1. So we talk about dynamic because it's essentially the relationship between two investments into different periods. Now, if there exists this dynamic complementarity, it means that the more you invest in one period, the more the investment in the next period is going to be productive. And so this is why it's very efficient to invest in younger children, because this is going to increase the productivity of a later investment. And this happens because the skills, the capabilities of the child and investment are also complements. What does this imply also? It implies also the other way around. It implies that later investment raise the value or the returns to earlier investment. In particular cases, when there is like strong complementarity, later investment are crucial for early ones to be effective. So, and this is taken from an Untitled Chapter that I wrote with James Heckman. And so early childhood investment alone are not enough to be effective. They have to be followed up with quality schooling and parenting. And of course, complementarity can be tested, so it's not like for granted. Now, I just wanted to introduce the possibility that when parents answer that they're all equally important, they might not have meant early childhood doesn't really matter. They might just have meant, well, what does it mean that we care about kids 0-5 and then we don't do anything anymore about them? So just to, it would have been useful to elaborate more. Maybe in the interviews they asked about parents, what exactly did you mean? What you had in mind when you answered this? And then the other very important point that I think this report does absolutely a great job in pointing to is the role of knowledge and what we call parental beliefs in child development. And this is particularly important because it's actually a very recent area of work in economics, which is becoming quite active. And so briefly, we all know that some parents, like disadvantaged parents, invest less in their children. And so, of course, the question is why they do that. So in terms of an economic model, it's very simple. There could be different reasons, such as, well, they don't care about their children, what we call parental preferences. They don't have enough money to buy, goods for them. So they are financially constrained. They don't have time to play with them. So there will be time constraints. They don't know it matters to play with them. So there will be information constraints. And then, of course, to know which ones of these constraints are binding, it's really important because we have different policies to be put in place. So there is pretty good evidence, and this report provides some more evidence. So if you look at, the way they correlate different parental determinants with these beliefs about the importance of early and late investment, that disadvantaged parents or low SES parents or income parents have less knowledge of child development. And in many cases, you will see that they don't talk to the children, they don't interact with them because they think they can't understand. So to give some more evidence on this, there is actually a former colleague of mine, Teodora Boneva from UCL, and then Chris Rao, who published a paper in 2010 in the journal European Economic Association, where they surveyed the parents of primary and secondary school children in UK. And essentially they asked them, they perceived returns to investment made between year 3 and 6, and those made between year 7 and 10 on the child. And their measure of investment was the number of hours parents spend every week helping the child with the schoolwork. So it was really specific educational investment. And their measure of returns is expected earnings at age 30. So it's really like focused on education and earnings. And they asked parents, whether they perceived the one period of investment to be more productive than another. What they found, well, something actually that I think aligns with the Royal Foundation report, that parents perceive late investment to be more productive than early ones. and also perceive the type of investments to be substitutes rather than complements. And high-income parents perceive higher returns to earn investment. So some implications from this work for the Royal Foundation report is that it seems to be important to be more specific when you ask parents or caregivers about something. So the Royal Foundation report asks about the importance for health and happiness in adulthood. This work asks about earnings, but parents might well think that, you know, different periods matter for one dimension versus another. Also, it's really important to understand when you ask parents about the important certain period, what do you mean? Do you mean something you do to your child, something about nutrition, something about provision of health care, attachment, playing, anything else? None of this is specified in the report, so it's really like whatever the parents will think about, and they might have thought about different things. And then the last thing that I want to talk about, because this also touched up in the report, is about the specific role of COVID impacts on child development. So in the report, I think there is a very nice and interesting piece which resonates with other work which has come out in this period, which is that relatively few parents think that the pandemic will have a negative impact on the child development, which probably tells you something about, you know, the characteristics of these parents responding. But there are some differences. So parents who do not live with a partner are more concerned, and they are especially concerned about the lack of socialization. And there are even 44% who think that the child's brain and mind development will be better because essentially they will spend more time learning with their children, playing and talking to them. So parents seem to believe that they actually can do a lot. Especially parents whose working hours have been reduced, and so they've had more time to spend with their children, seem to think that their child development will improve. And so this is actually quite interesting because it perfectly aligns with some other work that I've been doing during the pandemic, where we've been surveying first-time parents of children aged less than 5 years. And in particular, we have a sample of 560, and we have surveyed them the first time at the height of the initial the lockdown, and then when the schools were reopened in the summer, and now we're following them up a third time. And just like the previous work, we are essentially asked about different hypothetical scenarios, things that might have done or might not have done. And in particular, we've asked whether so out of 100 children, how many do they think they will reach a good level of development if they do or do not attend school? And this was like during the summer where, you know, the childcare settings were open, so they could have attended school. Well, they played with them frequently or rarely, or they played with other children frequently or rarely, and this is where the playgrounds were open. So what we have found? So we found that as compared to not playing, not going to preschool and playing with parents and children rarely, each of these activity improve the child development in the sense that increases the number of children out of 100 expected to reach a good level of development. But, and we see here, different combinations of activity achieve different expected levels. And so just to give you the summary of this, what we find is that parental play, so whether parents play with their children frequently rather than rarely, has a significant larger effects than going to childcare or preschool or to play with other kids. And parents, respondents, they also believe that all these activities, playing with parents, playing with other kids, and going to preschool, are partially substitutes. And just like we've seen, there are differences because the wealthiest households, those married, believe they can do more and better, and more children reach a good level of development. Working respondents believe less will, probably because they have less time to spend with them, just as we've seen in the Royal Foundation report. And then the last thing that I wanted to show is this graph here, where we asked which aspect of development were you thinking about? And you see that the respondents ranked most important speech and language, cognitive, emotional, social development, and then relatively less physical. But then many of them seem to be concerned about the fact that being alone at home with their parents, no socialization, there would be one dimension of children where they would have been behind. So perhaps we should, think some more about these issues. And so some thoughts for discussion. That it seems to be that parents maybe are slightly overestimating their parenting ability. They seem to believe that, they can do a lot to help their children. Maybe that is the case, but maybe do they know what they can do and how they can do it? How secure are in their perceived knowledge about the importance, say, of the earlier period versus later year period? Does this mean that if we just inform them, as many early interventions do, the things will be better off? Or there are other constraints like financial time constraints, which are binding, and so we should try and relax more than once, like it's also trying to do in some interventions. And then I was really curious, like if the same survey were implemented in other countries such as France and Norway, how it would look like. So yeah, then maybe we can discuss some of these issues.